Hey everybody, Eric Grenier here with Philippe J. Fournier for this week's episode of The Numbers. Philippe, are you ready for an Ontario election?
Looks like one is coming, huh? I mean, we've been saying that for months now, it feels. But I think next week is going to be it. So good morning, Eric. It's good to see you and talk to you again. Hello, everybody. I think, Eric, we usually start with the federal stuff, but I think we have to start with Ontario this week, right? We have lots of numbers, and as you said, a writ drop is coming soon. It's going to be a short and quick campaign. So where do you want to set foot first? Where do you want to start here?
I think we should ask our viewers and our listeners to spare a thought for those of us who work in this business, because what do we got? We're going to have a month of an Ontario election campaign. We're going to have a Liberal leadership race that is happening at the same time, with the vote taking place maybe 2 weeks, a week after the Ontario election is over. And then I'm not even sure if we make it to the 24th for a federal campaign, depending on who ends up winning. So, get some rest, because the next few days are the last ones we have. We will start with Ontario.
Yeah.
Because not only do we have all of this discussion about an early election coming, we have a little bit of a polling controversy. Disagreement.
Yeah.
And we love that. So why is this happening with an election? We've heard from Doug Ford saying that with the tariffs coming from south of the border, that he needs a strong mandate for the next 4 years, not for today, not for tomorrow, but for the next 4 years.
Yeah.
They're having what they're calling a super caucus meeting or something like that on the weekend, which sounds more or less like the training school for the campaign. It's coming. It's just coming. I mean, let's not pretend that it's not coming. And it might be coming as soon as Wednesday. So we could be voting in Ontario. I think the date I saw was February
27th. Yes, 27th. That's right.
And we also have some polling that we're going to talk about. So, Philippe, what's been the numbers over the last little week or so? Because they're not all the same.
So we had a flurry of Ontario polls in the past week. Again, unsurprisingly, since we think a rip drop is coming. We had Main Street Research, 40% PC, which is on par with what we've seen before. It's been like low to middle 40s in the past 6 months for the PCs. 30% for the Ontario Liberals. Now, this should make your eyebrows raise a little bit, because we haven't seen a 30% in a long time for the Ontario Liberals. 21 NDP, 5% Greens. And then with those numbers, it's easy to wonder, okay, so are the Ontario Liberals back as the main opponent of the PCs? Since 2018, the NDP has been the official opposition in Queen's Park. And so I think it was a fair thing to ask. But then we have a new Léger poll. Léger poll that just, the OLP is not back at all. 46% PCs. And I looked it up. That's the highest of the publicly available polls for Doug Ford's PCs. 22% the Ontario Liberals and 19 NDP. That's a big gap between 30% for the Liberals and 22% for Liberals. What do you make of this, Eric?
The numbers from Main Street, we also saw from Liaison, we talked about it last week, which had the Liberals somewhere around 32%. It was a bit surprising to see the Liberals that high, because I don't think that the Ontario Liberals had done much to boost their numbers by that much. It could have been some sort of overlap with what we're seeing at the federal level. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but there are some polls that are showing the Liberals higher, particularly ones that use the same methodologies as Liaison and to a lesser extent Main Street. But what was really kind of funny about the Léger poll is that when the Main Street numbers were coming out, we saw tweets from Nick Kouvalis, who is Doug Ford's pollster. He runs campaign research, and he can be a little bit feisty sometimes on the Twitter machine. And he put out his own internal numbers, which had 47 PC, 23 Liberals, 19 NDP. And then we have the Léger poll, a public Léger poll that was commissioned by Post Media, pretty much identical numbers to what campaign showed.
Yeah,
it does put the balance of gut on the side of that, right?
Yeah.
That we're looking at the PC somewhere in the mid to high 40s the Liberals in the mid to low 20s, and the NDP somewhere around 19 or 20%. And there's also a post by Greg Lyle from Innovative Research Group. He put it on LinkedIn. He says he's going to have the numbers coming out soon. It had the same kind of numbers, but even better for the PCs. So I do kind of think that this is what we're actually looking at right now, that the PCs are in such a strong position, and that's maybe why they're going to a campaign. You said it at the beginning. We've been talking about this for months.
Yeah.
It wasn't that just suddenly because of the tariff threat that Doug Ford realized he needed a new mandate. He wanted a new mandate back in the fall. We were joking about how that election was coming, right? So even in our over-under, before we heard much about this at all, we were talking about the Ontario election that was coming. So, I mean, it can be true that they could use a new mandate, and also that it is politically advantageous to go right now. The two things don't necessarily have to be at odds with each other, but things are lining up pretty well for Doug Ford and the PCs.
Listen, for those who are very cynical, say why would Doug Ford go a year and a half almost early? If you were an advisor to the PCs and to Doug Ford, you would say there's no better way to go into an election. There's no better moment to go into an election campaign. They're having the best polls. Monsieur Ford is parading the Council of the Federation with a new cap on, with Canada's not for sale. He's basically filling the vacuum of the Captain Canada to face up to Donald Trump and his tariffs. I mean, you cannot dream of a better scenario for the PCs. I know, again, some people will say we have a fixed date election law, but that law says basically that it's a suggestion, the fixed date election. It's not an obligation. And so that's the thing. Again, we will come back to this at the mailbag, but historically, at least in the precedents that I have looked in this century, Eric, I do not see examples of conservative parties being punished for going into an early election. Like, conservative voters usually do not care about this as long as they win. Whereas for Liberals and NDP, it's another story. So it will be, as you said, it will be a quick election. It's 4 weeks, right? Is there a time in 4 weeks for Bonnie Crombie or Marit Stiles to really flip the script? It's so hard to imagine. The PCs would have to lose this on their own, and it doesn't look like it's even remotely possible when you look at the numbers and the map.
One of the things that is remarkable from the Leger poll is the Captain Canada role that Doug Ford is playing does seem to have helped him quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
Ford has really, for most of his time in office, been one of the more unpopular premiers. His approval ratings are usually underwater. He has done well in part because he gets a bit more popular when an election actually happens, and or his opposition has been very, very weak. But the Leger poll found favorability ratings for Doug Ford 47% favorable, 48% unfavorable. Usually we see 2-to-1 disapproval or unfavorable for Doug Ford. So it does seem potentially that the last few weeks have really improved his image. And you have Bonnie Crombie, who's underwater by 8 points, and Marit Stiles is about the same, 25 favorable, 25 unfavorable, which means half of people don't have a solid opinion about her.
For me, that's the main point of the main thing that strikes out of this chart, that half of Ontario voters do not know who the official opposition leader is in Marit Stiles. So she has been leader for almost 2 years now, year and a half. So anyway, she hasn't been able to show Ontario voters, to speak to other people than NDP voters, basically. But that's bad. I mean, official opposition leader, half of the voters don't know who you are. Ouch. Yeah.
There was an interesting part, though, from the poll. They asked about what was the most important issue for voters. 28% said cost of living. Healthcare was second at 12%. The Trump tariffs and the U.S. relations was only 5%. Now, that doesn't mean that it's the election deciding issue is going to be Trump, or that is top of mind for people. But I think it is going to color a lot of the campaign. But it does kind of remind us that when the campaign begins, if Doug Ford and the PCs want to make it about Donald Trump, voters might not go along with that. And that is a risk, I think, that they are playing. But it is a risk, but it's also... You do kind of look at the opposition parties and have some doubts that they can take advantage of it, that they're really in a very strong position to do that. And that, to me, mitigates the risk. If they were up against a well-known, popular, but just not polling very highly kind of opposition, then maybe I'd think that someone could take advantage of it. But you still kind of think that they do have most of the cards, and they're going to play them and probably win the hand pretty big.
But the most chosen issue in this poll is the cost of living, as you mentioned, Eric, and it would be very easy for Doug Ford and the PCs to lump cost of living with the tariffs, right? If the tariffs do come and it costs jobs and it costs businesses, it will be lumped into the same big overall issue. Like things cost too much, and we have to make sure that the Canadian economy stays afloat. So I don't think it's that big of a stretch for the PCs to run on that. And also, since it's such a quick campaign, what other issue could spring up? Those who say healthcare, sure, healthcare is always a problem. In any province, any provincial election, healthcare is right up there. But it doesn't mean that it moves votes that much. So we're gonna have to come back to this to the Ontario election, of course, since it's gonna start next week, we think. But also to come back to our little predictions that we made during the Christmas time. I think some of them will be pretty good, because I think the numbers, not only did we expect the PCs to win this handily, it could be even an easier victory for the PCs if the numbers we saw this week hold. So,
with these kinds of numbers, what are we looking at? 95 seats?
Well, here's the thing. Tomorrow I will publish an updated projection, and I did a few runs. We're getting close to 100 seats. I mean, the Leger numbers, break it down. I know the subsamples regionally are small, so we have to be careful. But the PC is leading everywhere. They lead by 30 points in the GTA. They lead by 25, 30 points in the rural areas. And even in Toronto proper, in Metro Toronto, it was 38% PCs, 31% OLP. And the NDP was at 19 in Toronto, which, if the NDP wanted to make gains in the city, those are not good numbers to do that. So, and also we have to remember there's vote splitting happening, right? The PCs don't even need the vote splits right now. They could just win on their own if they have 45, 46%. So
how many over under on parties that achieve official party status? Is it 1.5?
Damn, it could be
12 seats needed, and boy, because if the PCs get up to 100 seats, there's only 24 left.
That's right.
And you got to split them among three parties, because the Greens are probably going to win two, at least, right?
And maybe an independent in there. So, what happens if no other party reaches opposition status? I mean, they would be officially independents, right? Yes. I don't know. It's such a strange scenario, but
yeah. The Queen's Park would probably vote to recognize them. It's always up to the House to decide if they want to recognize those parties. And also, maybe they won't, but they probably should.
And
wouldn't it be funny? It would change the precedent if maybe we have 11 NDP, 10 Liberal. You probably got to recognize both of them as official parties rather than just one. I don't know.
That would quite be the move if that were to happen. But I looked in the history of Ontario elections in the 20th century, and let's say Doug Ford wins like 95 of 124 seats. That would be the biggest victory in percentage of seats since the 50s, right? I mean, David Peterson's Ontario Liberals did win 95 seats, but it was in a larger legislature. And we haven't seen big numbers since Leslie Frost. So again, perhaps a third straight majority. That would be a first since the 50s. Perhaps the largest victory in the 60 or 70 years. But again, we don't want to say that it's done. Obviously, voters will, we hope, go to the polls.
Campaigns matter. We'll see if they still matter in Ontario.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. We do have some federal numbers to talk about.
Yep.
Not actually a lot of them. We got a lot of numbers in the previous week. This past week, we haven't seen too many. There was the usual Nanos poll that came out. Nothing really new there. 45 Conservative, 21 Liberal, 19 NDP. But then we got the numbers from ECOS. that we can't really ignore here.
We can't ignore them. No.
They've been taking a lot of place on social media, and the numbers from Ecos, they had two sets of numbers. One was a shorter poll of, I think, 4 days. One was a longer poll from 9 days. So if we just look at the 9-day poll, which had a bigger sample, 39 for the Conservatives, 30 for the Liberals, 16 for the NDP.
Yeah.
What do we make of this?
Okay. I will say this, and I follow the scientific method, right? I'm a physicist. I teach students about the scientific method, and obviously it's not a dogma, but usually I go with extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, right? I always give the benefit of the doubt, because when there's a trend change, like the curves move, the first one to detect it are sometimes just tossed aside. Says, oh, this poll is different, so it's probably wrong. So I always give benefit of the doubt. But the margins between what Ecos is measuring and everybody else is so large that it probably isn't the actual picture. If it is, we will know shortly, because I'm sure other pollsters, especially with the leadership race of the LPC going on, we will have federal polls. We have several federal polls every week, so we will know if there's a big movement. And Ecos either has several eggs on their face, or they saw something. And if you ask me for my gut feeling, Eric, this is probably too big a move for me to believe. But I always go with the evidence. But extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. What about you, Eric? What would you say about that?
This one I find is difficult, because we have seen from Ecos in the past that sometimes they put out polls that look like everybody else's polls, and sometimes they put out polls that look quite a bit different.
Yeah.
And that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes, it means that they have, you said, as they're catching a trend, and sometimes it's just an outlier. That's what happens when you have, random digit dialing kind of polls, which is what Ecos does. This is a big difference.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like it captures the vibe of where things kind of are. But the issue I'm having with this is that we did see a couple of polls, I think in the fall, where the Ecos had them a little bit higher, 25, 26% sometimes, when other pollsters had them a bit lower. A 5-point difference between pollsters, not a big deal. Margin of error stuff. But it's when you're getting to what is starting to get up 10 or even more. Today, as we're recording on Thursday, Frank Grace was tweeting that the margin was even getting tighter in his polling. I'm not sure how, because Ecos uses the same methodology it always has.
Yeah.
And I part of me is saying, okay, this looks like nothing that we've seen from anybody else. But part of me is also saying that, is it really possible for Ecos to have a 12 or 13 point error? It makes me think that there must be at least something going on. Could Ecos, or any other pollster really, go into the field and get 32% when the reality is 20? I don't know. Like, that feels like that's not plausible, especially for it to be sustained.
Exactly, to be sustained. If it's a one-off, you toss it to the side, it happens. If it's sustained, that's the thing, and we don't want to presume of bad intentions or bad behavior. We don't have evidence of that. But when you see something like this, you shake your head, and at least I do, and I say, okay, well, let's wait, because I've seen a lot of people online basically say, why don't you remove Ecos from your rating? Why don't you remove Ecos from your list? And I was like, I'm not going to choose to take a pollster that's been doing this for, 30 years? Mm-hmm. More than that, maybe, yeah. I think sunlight is the best disinfectant. If Ecos is wrong, and I think they are, but we'll see, I could be wrong. If Ecos is wrong, we will know. Right. It's not like we will have to wait 6 weeks. We will know next week or the week after that. So thing is, I've talked to several pollsters over the past few days about many things, including what's going on with Ecos. Other pollsters don't like this. they do not rejoice in seeing one of their peers or competitors do something like this, because if ECOS is wrong, they basically poison the well for everybody, right? It makes the industry look bad. So, again, I will reserve judgment because we will know very soon if really there is movement. Because let's say next week, Léger, just early February, Léger published a new poll for the National Post, as they do every month, and it shows Liberals at 27. Then
Right.
what do we say? It's like, oh, okay, there's something. But if it keeps being 21, 22, 23, 20, then clearly there's something wrong here with ECOS. So,
Yeah,
patience.
I think that's it. It's that we have to approach, as you said, when something extraordinary happens, you need extraordinary evidence. So we have to approach it with caution and patience, right?
Yeah.
We'll see if this proves to be the first part of a new trend or something that has gone quite badly with the polling. So we won't have to wait long to know the answer. So people shouldn't freak out either way right now. I don't think Liberals should be rejoicing because they have these polls, and I don't think that Conservatives should be taking out the pitchforks and the torches just yet. I think we can wait for that.
It's worth noting, however, that last week, just after we recorded the episode, Main Street Research released its latest federal poll, and it had the Liberals at 26, right? Conservative 45, so basically the Conservatives were stable. But Main Street did measure a small bump for the Liberals, mostly at the expense of the NDP. And it's something that Palace Data also early in the month, just after the Trudeau resignation, saw a small bump for the Liberals. And I believe that some pollsters would detect a small bump. That's entirely believable. But 30 or 32 for the Liberals right now is a bit pushing it. So again, we'll see in time. And for those who scream that of conspiracy or anything, sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Could the Liberal leadership race be causing this, that people are so excited about these options that they're rushing to take part in the polls as soon as the phone rings? They're very excited. This is one of the theories that David Coletto put forward, that the kind of polling that is done now over the telephone might engage more enthusiastic people, and when
That's
they're
fair.
more depressed, they might not vote, which was one of the thoughts of the Democrats in the United States. But anyway, the Liberal leadership race. We chatted about it before we started recording. It's not as exciting as perhaps we would have preferred. Nice big field of controversial candidates and all these different dynamics playing out. We really just seem to have Mark Carney, who apparently has some of the momentum. Chrystia Freeland had a pretty rough launch on the weekend, and I wouldn't say had a great week afterwards. And Karina Gould is the third kind of major candidate in this, but even that might be a bit generous. We did see big endorsements from Mark Carney over the last week, including from Mélanie Joly, Stephen Guilbeault, Sean Fraser, apparently François-Philippe Champagne. If he hasn't done it already, he's supposed
this
to.
morning. Yep.
He's got some other cabinet ministers like Patty Hajdu and Harjit Sajjan. Freeland has fewer endorsements, but not many fewer. It's like somewhere around like 30 to 25. But she's got some from cabinet ministers, Terry Beach, Mark Holland, Diane Le Boutillier. What are you making of how this race is unfolding so far? Because it does seem like caucus is, a lot of caucus, at least a third, more than a third up to now, has made their choice.
Yeah, but is this a race to have the most caucus endorsements? That's the thing.
No.
I understand that if you're a candidate for leadership, you want to have endorsements. I get that. But it's still members or sympathizers that will vote. It's not... If the MPs were choosing the leader, it would be a different thing. So I'm not sure. I mean, if let's say I'm looking at this and it's like, I want to vote into a leadership race, does the fact that Monsieur Champagne decide to throw his weight around towards Monsieur Carney, does that tip the balance for the ordinary voter? Maybe. I don't know. I don't know how people are swayed by this, especially considering, I mean, you remember those polls. Very few Canadians can name cabinet ministers. They don't know. Most Canadians do not know who these people are. So, you gotta no. Monsieur Sajan, I know Mr. Sajan has been in politics for a long time, but also the fact that he's not running again. So I approve of this candidate, but I won't be there to support him in the next election. How much weight does that have? So I don't want to say I'm underwhelmed because my expectations were low, but Eric, it is not just a leadership race. This person that will win will become prime minister. So it should, I think, capture more attention than it does. But to be fair, it's barely just started, and I think it will be later this week that the nomination limit. I think it's this Sunday.
The end of today.
Oh, it's today.
Today.
Right. All right.
To plunk down your $50,000, get your signatures in. So we will presumably know. I don't know how long the Liberals will wait before they announce it. We'll know who made at least that first cut. Some of them could end up being not greenlit by the party. That's always a possibility. But who will make that first cut? And then the deadline for becoming a member is the 27th.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
So that is only in a few days.
Yeah.
I'm very curious to see how many members will end up being signed up. It's free to become a member, so it's not like you have to sell those memberships. Yeah. Apparently, the party had around 85,000 registered Liberals, as they term them, before this race began. They only really had 2 weeks to sign new people up. Will we see the number be really big? If the number isn't very big, then it makes me think that these kinds of cabinet endorsements, caucus endorsements, might carry some weight because these are people who are already involved with the party. And so maybe, their local MP, maybe they're people who volunteer in the riding association, they're going to follow where their person is going, right? So, and these endorsements it always depends on what they're going to do with them, right? If you just put something on Twitter and then wipe your hands of it and say, I'm done, I did my work, then it's not going to do anything. But if you sign people up, if you use your local, riding association volunteers to try to get the vote out, that's where it can matter. Some of these MPs are going to put some weight behind their endorsements. Some of them aren't. We don't really know who is going to actually do anything and who won't.
That's the thing. That's why it's so hard to judge.
That's the big question here.
Yeah. That's why it's so hard to judge. And again, this is called the numbers. We don't have numbers on this. And I wish we did. But even if we had, let's say next week we do get a federal poll that has leadership numbers on it, it's still just the population of Liberal supporters. It gives us maybe an indication, but at this point, Eric, what does your gut tell you? Like, do you feel like Monsieur Mark Carney should be the overwhelming favorite?
No. I wouldn't say overwhelming favorite. I would say he is the favorite. He does seem to have the kind of momentum, which I think will excite people who are within the party. I think that's also one of the things that the endorsements do. They signal to members like who's got the momentum, who's got the backing. It's notable that a lot of cabinet ministers who would have sat in cabinet with Chrystia Freeland have endorsed Mark Carney. And that's the kind of signal that I think that can go a bit further. And I can imagine that Carney is doing a better job attracting new people into the party, people who weren't already active, people who had drifted away, than Chrystia Freeland, who has had such a long history with the party and has been so closely tied with Justin Trudeau, even if those ties were broken at the last moment. So I think that Carney would be the favorite right now. I'm not sure if he would be like first ballot favorite. I don't think so. But right now, I would say it would be Carney first, Freeland second, and maybe whoever's the fourth, fifth, if it's Chandra Arya and Frank Baylis, maybe their votes are enough to get Mark Carney over the top. But that's where I would say I think things are. How would you assess where things are?
Oh,
not knowing much.
That's the thing. I don't like to have my impressions out when it's
a vibe check.
Right, it's a vibe check, and I'm not really good with vibes. I usually read the tea leaves wrong when I just go with the vibes. So you would think that Miss Freeland, even though maybe she has some opponents in the Liberals because of what happened with Justin Trudeau, you would think that she would have the organization battle already in place, with unlike Monsieur Carney, who's basically new coming to the game. But perhaps the Liberals want to go with an outsider. Well, outsider, you know what I mean. He's describing himself as outsider, and he hasn't been in cabinet. He hasn't been by Justin Trudeau's sides since 2013. But that's my vibe check. So I do not know what to expect. I really want numbers. I want numbers on this, and I think I'm not sure we're going to get many quality numbers on this, but we'll
get some fundraising numbers in a few weeks.
Yeah, that's true. That should tell us a bit. Yes, absolutely.
And if we get the membership numbers, and then everybody can claim how many they signed up, which is always fun. There'll be 150,000 members, but when you add up all the claims, it'll be about 1 million, I'm sure. So we'll try to parse through that when the numbers come out. All right. You don't have a quiz for me this week. Is that correct?
That is correct. We did one last week, and you did well. I will reserve my quizzes. I will have a liberal leadership quiz soon.
Okay.
Perhaps I'm just thrown out there. So perhaps if you want to study or review stuff, I know you don't do that usually because you know everything
cheating.
by heart.
Studying is cheating. That's how I felt in university too. So why don't we just move right to the number of the week? How about I'll go first. So my number of the week is 49%. So this was the share of Canadians in an Abacus poll. This was a poll that was done for the Logic, who want to see the carbon tax changed or reversed, compared to 29% who said they wanted it to stay. I found that interesting because that gap is not as big as you would have thought based on the commentary around the carbon tax, that it is an albatross around the Liberals' neck and everybody's dumping it. And so it actually isn't as unpopular as people make it out to be. Now, if you're the only party wanting to get rid of a carbon tax, 49% is pretty good. But I do think that's notable to note that the gap between the two is not really as exaggerated as it does seem to be based on what some people are saying. By comparison, Abacus asks, do you want to keep or get rid of some other Liberal policies? National dental care, 62% said keep, 19% get rid of. And on pharmacare, 60% said keep, 18% get rid of. So some of these are actually pretty popular.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure, again, there's always, when it comes to voters, it's nice to have, need to have. And while they might be popular, I'm not sure if they galvanize a lot of public opinion. But I thought these numbers were really interesting and went against some of our conventional wisdom.
Interesting. My number of the week is 40. And so in the Nanos rolling poll, the preferred prime minister, 40% said Poilievre. And that includes undecideds. There were 15% of undecideds. So whatever we think of Monsieur Poilievre and his tactics and his behavior and his campaign, his permanent campaign, we see gradually, even though his favor rules are not that high, we see gradually that many Canadians aren't getting ready for a Poilievre prime ministership. And I think, well, of course, right now the numbers are against nobody, right? Or Jagmeet Singh, but there's no Liberal leaders. So perhaps we should expect those conservative numbers to go up.
And okay, that'll be it for this week on the numbers. We got lots of great questions in our mailbag. We got stuff on the Liberal leadership, a little bit more on that federal polling controversy, on the Ontario election. So lots to chat about. If you want to listen to the mailbag episode, you can go to thenumberspod.ca. And Philippe, it is going to be a very busy few months for us.
Yes.
So at the very least, get some rest this weekend, and we'll chat in a week.
Absolutely, and we'll chat perhaps the Ontario election will have started, so we'll see. Head over to the mailbag, everybody, and have a great week.